Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. The South Carolina Ports Authority, a major economic driver in South Carolina, supporting 187,000 jobs and nearly $53 billion in annual economic activity. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
What are those things that affect your life and daily routine most? How do you interact and view your own community? If you could be king or queen for a day, what would one thing you could do, and what would you put in place to change things? Our discussions, our revelations might not be as grand as that, but we attempt to unpack the issues that people are most concerned about and loom large in our towns and cities. I'm Chris William, and welcome to the most widely watched program on Carolina business, policy, and public affairs. We will start this week's discussion in just a moment, and later on, Columbia College President Dr. Carol Moore.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com.
On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Brian Etheridge, Leadership North Carolina, Patrick Brown, Building Officials Association of South Carolina, and special guest Dr. Carol Moore, President, Columbia College.
Welcome to our program. Happy fall almost. Brian, good to have you here. Patrick, welcome.
Good to be here.
Brian, let's start with this thing that's been called, and I'm calling it that, but we use this term called rural-urban divide. And I was surprised. On a recent program, we had a program called Small Town Strong, and we had either mayors or city managers from small towns that had been thriving and were very robust, and we asked them the question about urban-rural divide. And they all kind of looked puzzled and said they don't see any problem at all. So I'm not being hyperbolic about this, but is there a myth about urban-rural divide? Is it real? And if it's real, what does it look like?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think one of the things that folks is helpful to understand is at the local level, folks are very concerned on, for lack of a better term, helping make sure the trains run on time. Local government, it meets people right where they are. You're going to see folks in the grocery store. When you move up in levels of government, whether it's regional or statewide or federal, things can get exacerbated on occasion. And I think at the heart, and part of what we talk about at Leadership North Carolina a great deal, is leaders from different parts of whether it's North Carolina or other parts of a region, being in community with one another, having relationships with one another, understanding where one another are coming from. And part of the key to that is sometimes it's sitting down and having 3 cups of coffee with somebody to understand their perspective. I think some of those challenges are indeed real, but it's that investment of time of helping understand where somebody else is coming from that can help bridge some of those divides.
It's almost made to sound like it's a crisis situation when it comes up. Is it critical? Is it something to spend time knowing? Is it maybe not as bad as we think it? Where would it fall in that continuum?
I think it's definitely something we need to pay very deliberate attention to. Specifically in North Carolina, you have communities that are declining in population and struggling, and there are communities certainly that are thriving. And I think if we're all being honest with one another, if there's any one part of a state that is not doing well, it impacts all of us, and it's incumbent upon all of us to find out how we can help support one another. And I think that it goes back to that heart of let's treat one another like neighbors. There's a lot of vitriol right now and a lot of divisiveness, but most folks on a day-to-day basis want to find out how they can collaborate and work and make things, make life better for one another.
Patrick, I want to ask you the same question from the point of Edisto Beach. Edisto Beach, this is my description, Edisto Beach is an economic bright spot in a place like Colleton County, and you've got Colleton, Hampton, Jasper counties. I would say not the richest counties in South Carolina, in fact, probably on the other end of that. But do you get a sense, is there some kind of urban-rural divide, and Edisto or Edisto Beach or Edisto Island would look to Columbia and the State House and say, you know, we don't have access to the resources we need? Do you get that sense? You feel that?
Well, for Edisto Beach, we've had a couple of hurricanes lately, and after those, we have got the resources we need very quickly. We have a strong mayor. Mayor Darby has a great relationship with the leaders in the state, and we all have a good working relationship with those leaders, and they respond quickly.
As we've described this urban-rural divide, do you get the sense there's this institutional divide between the biggest towns and the smallest towns, though?
I don't see that as an issue that's affecting Edisto Beach.
Yeah.
Like Brian said, we just need to pay attention to it and keep it in our sights and continue to work on those relationships with each other.
And Brian, let me come back. Since we're closing in on midterm elections, everybody's using that term now. I would go as far to say that maybe half of the electorate, or those who are going to vote, don't really know what's at stake. So 2 questions. Do you think a lot of these people know what's at stake in November? And number 2, what kind of dialogue do you foster among your alum and among citizens of North Carolina, and I would say citizens in general, to get us to a point where we can be productive when we vote and cast votes? So
to answer your first question about are folks paying attention, I think very soon most citizens, if they turn on the TV on any basis of regularity, will soon realize with campaign ads ramping up, you know, usually it's not until after Labor Day that things really ramp up. I think folks will be aware, and there will be messages from, you know, all campaigns on what is at stake. I think we're seeing a real interest in engagement this time around, and I think that's one of the key indicators that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. As far as it goes back to Leadership North Carolina, our constituents, our alumni, and leaders in general, so much of what we talk about is leaders really developing and having conversations with folks that think differently than they do, not to change somebody's mind, but simply to gain understanding. Because if I understand where you're coming from, we can figure out how to work past difficulties if we've got a relationship as the core thing, you know, anchoring our dialogue.
But how do you get someone cool-headed enough to actually be open-minded that somebody that could be screaming right across the table might actually have a point within all that passion?
So a couple of things. One is meals matter. Having somebody sit down over a meal and break bread together and have conversation and get to know where your kids go to school, what your family is like, and building that relationship. And I realize this is a world moving at exponential speed. Yeah, sure. This doesn't happen that way. This takes much longer. I think it's investing that time, because time's the one thing none of us get any more of. We can be incredibly productive, but investing in other leaders and investing in relationships pay dividends over the long run.
Patrick, I want to ask you, almost a year ago now to the date, exactly, Hurricane Irma moves in South Carolina coast and deposits a lot of sand on Edisto Beach and on Palmetto Boulevard and Jungle Road and all that. But even before that, you had Hurricane Matthew do the same thing. So you're getting these tidal waves of weather with bad attitude, and they're closing down places like Edisto. So how do you think differently about managing floodplains? How do you think differently about managing a beach and a tourist destination when you've got what seemingly is going to be now that kind of weather, given global warming or whatever you call it, that is going to be more of a norm than it is an exception?
Well, as far as managing the community, you need education is a big thing. When you live on the coastline, you have an elevated risk, and those residents need to be aware of that. Mm-hmm. We do a good job with floodplain management outreach programs to educate the public, and
just the idea of not just educating, but Patrick, living in the middle of that, and not just keeping people to live at Edisto Beach, but how does Edisto able to afford that kind of dig out after there's been a hurricane?
It does have a financial impact on the town for those type storms. Our administration does a great job with the federal government as far as recovering a lot of that money.
So is Edisto a pass-through for federal dollars to be able to do that, or do the feds come in and take control, like they'll send National Guard in to clean up the streets?
We did have some National Guard after Hurricane Matthew and Irma, but mostly SCDOT worked as far as pushing sand off Palmetto Boulevard. Is there,
there's a big dialogue among those who live inland and those who live on the coast. And those who live inland don't want to pay for any cleanup or bear the burden if folks on the coast can't be insured. Does that show up in dialogues in City Council, at Edisto, or at bars or across the fences? I mean, how does that dialogue play out in tourist cities?
It sure does. You have people that aren't on the coast, not in the floodplain, that feel like they're paying dollars that subsidize the people that do live on the coast. And that conversation comes up quite frequently.
How does it end, you think?
Well, it ends the same way it starts, with people still on opposite sides of the fence.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I know, and it's probably going to be that way for a while. Gentlemen, stay with us. Coming up on this program, his name is Thomas Barkin. He is the president, fairly new president, of the Richmond Federal Reserve, and it says Richmond Federal Reserve, but it's probably its largest impact is in North and South Carolina, because that is part of the largest part of the Fed district. And also coming up, North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein will be on this program as well. With 160 years of continuous service to the community, Columbia College maintains the women's-only status of this higher education private school, with its recently installed president and an earlier announced cut in tuition. What is this 1,200 enrolled student college's strategy for growth? Well, joining us now, conveniently, Dr. Carol Moore, president of Columbia College. Dr. Moore, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Moore, so what is your strategy for growth? You got a fairly small private liberal arts school, been around for a long time in the Midlands, right. Active part of the community. How do you not just survive, but how do you thrive, and how do you sell your plan to students and to Columbia leaders?
Well, it's a diversified plan. Small private women's colleges, as you're aware, have been closing regularly over the last decade. And one of the strategies that many women's colleges use is diversification of their programming and hence their revenue stream. So back 5 years ago, the college started online programs. Even before that, we had a co-ed evening school, co-ed graduate programs, and of course online is co-educational as well. But there is still a very strong commitment to maintaining the women's college. It's really, in my opinion anyway, much needed these days. Despite a lot of progress in women's equality, we still have a long way to go. And women's colleges really provide fertile ground to develop women and their leadership skills.
When you, and again, this is my term, and I don't want to be tabloid or hyper about it. How do you, as you just said, a lot of women's or specific gender colleges have gone by the wayside. How do you not have this sense of whistling past the graveyard and just knowing that, well, someday we might not be able to be all women? Or do you expect fully that for the next 100 years, Columbia College will be women only because that's how it thrives?
I believe that the Columbia College will maintain at its core the women's college. Interestingly enough, we're seeing across the country a bit of an uptick in young women's interest in going to a women's college. So it's not significant at this moment, but we're seeing some indications of that. And I think the education that the women get there, I mean, some of our students come, and believe it or not, they don't realize that it's a women's college, a couple of them. But they find that they really do get a great experience. They find their voice, as many of our graduates say. And that voice is a strong voice. They feel comfortable and confident in their own abilities. And that really is part of what's special about an all-women's college.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't survive as an all-women's college alone. We've got to keep up with the times. We've got to have pockets of coeducational programming, and we do that through, as I mentioned, online and evening school. And starting new programs. I mean, these days, students and their parents are very practical. They want to be able to see a career path from that degree.
Right.
One of the things that intrigued me most as we were kind of talking in the green room is this phrase you shared with me about communiversity and kind of the role of liberal arts education. And I wanted to have you kind of expound on that communiversity and how you are keeping Columbia College really nimble in a very rapidly changing environment in higher education.
Yeah, well, it certainly has been called the whitewater times in higher education, and that's really quite true. The whole system is undergoing a lot of change, but the communiversity piece is. We didn't invent it. There are about 14 of them around the country. They were started close by in Georgia. But the name intrigued me because it's simply, you know, putting community and university together. And we've been a member of the Columbia environment for 164 years, and my feeling is we really need to make sure that we serve the community as well as utilize some of the community resources that are there. So our intent, using that word, is to provide programs that are relevant to our community, to seek input into what the community needs, both the citizens as well as the business and industry in that area. And then, if it's appropriate for our mission, develop programs that are pertinent to our community.
Patrick.
Yeah.
To change gears a little bit, with me being in the construction and the codes industry, and we are having a lull in the workforce. But a lot of us are getting older and fading away. We're not getting that much younger interest in the workforce. Obviously, employers seek students with higher education. What do we do to develop for workforce development for those that might not be headed toward a four-year degree?
Well, I think there are a number of avenues for those types of individuals. Of course, in South Carolina, there's the technical college system. In North Carolina, there's the community college system. I happen to have been at a community college for over a decade in Massachusetts, so I'm a real believer in the education that they provide. Right. So those are shorter-term programs that some of them are broad liberal arts, some of them are fine-tuned to more technical areas, right. But those are options for students. My experience in being in a community college, and it still holds true here, the time that I've been in South Carolina, is that many graduates with an associate degree go out and work for a while, get some good skills, get some real experience, and then they find they're ready to move on in their career, and that two-year degree is not going to serve them anymore in terms of moving along in their career, and they do wind up coming back. At Columbia, 1/4 of our day population in the women's college comes from the technical colleges in the state. So I know that they come back eventually, and that's fine. Today's student is very different than they were when I went to college, that's for sure. They come in, they go out, they come back again, go out again, come back for a master's, go out again. And so I think our job in higher education is to make as many options available to students as the students need so that they can continue their education and be good citizens and good people in the workplace to drive the economy.
Do you see, Dr. Moore, in the not too distant future, and I know you referred to your partnership with Midlands Tech in the Midlands, So is community colleges, technical colleges, kind of on this tact, and the cost at four-year universities is on this tact, and all of this is evolving at some point? Would we ever get to the point of a seamless higher education model where it's no longer community or technical college, it's no longer just four-year degree, but it's really some type of hybrid that's cheaper to go to, that is almost a la carte, and does not even really look anything like it does right now?
Oh, I think those days are upon us. If you look at what's happening, if I can call higher ed an industry, which I think it is, right now what's becoming very, very popular and very desirable are for short-term certificate programs and what we're calling badges that certify that you have a certain level of skill in an area. Those are cropping up at most institutions because people, even people who go out after their associate's degree, let's say, into the workplace, they want to come back for certain types of skills. So right now at our college, we've just launched a certificate program in leadership, because that's one of our hallmark programs in leadership, and it is threaded throughout our curriculum. We've also created a badge, which is a smaller unit of education on diversity. And we think that someone, for instance, in a business administration program should, in fact, get that certificate and get that badge, because those are the skills that employers are looking for as someone who they bring in at an entry-level position and move up the career ladder.
And I know Brian wants a stab at that one. Are those certificates and that badge, is that standardized across education, or is that specific to Columbia?
Well, these two are specific to us, but more and more colleges and universities are establishing their own certificate and badge programs.
I can feel you pulling at your choke chain here.
Well, and you got me so excited because there were so many keywords like badge and leadership, but it got me thinking too about your background and, you know, being at Columbia College, about leadership, about badges, and your role with the Girl Scouts, and what a amazing organization that is, and fostering leadership and helping young women develop and really to become who they can be. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your passion around that, and how that really how that has evolved into what you're doing at Columbia, and specifically what Christopher was just sharing a moment ago.
Yeah. Well, I was very proud to be a Girl Scout in my younger days, and a Brownie, of course, first, and then to serve on the Vermont State Board for the Girl Scouts. It is a terrific organization. I mean, it's a great organization, and they do wonderful things for young girls, and again, more needed today than I think ever before. And the badge idea, you know, it's interesting that, I mean, that was it. You know, you had your sash and you got your badges, and each badge stood for the fact that you had developed a certain skill level in that area. And it's really the same concept now in higher education. I mean, people want to be able to prove that they can do certain things, or be knowledgeable to a certain level in a certain area. And that's kind of an add-on to the actual degree, and it's becoming very, very popular.
We're going to run out of time, Patrick. I'm going to have to take the last question because I want to do a follow-up on the scouting, the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. Dr. Morse, so Boy Scouts have been compelled to accept girls within their packs now. I don't want to ask you if that's a good or a bad idea, but at the head of a gender-specific university, is there a place for genders to be separate?
In my opinion, yes. It does allow a certain amount of liberation or freedom for that separation, and I think that's more true for young girls and women than it is for young boys. But there is a place for that, even though fundamentally the genders need to understand each other and work together. And now gender itself is up for grabs. The millennials, according to the cover of Time magazine, are going to redefine gender. So that'll be kind of an interesting event to see occur. But I do think for, you know, young girls and women, that's very important.
Thank you for being on the program, and thanks for stepping into the role at Columbia College. Best of luck there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Patrick, good to see you. Thanks for being up here from Edisto. Great spot.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And nicely done down there. Always nice to see you, Mr. Etheridge.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for being on, watching our program. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Hope your weekend is good and your business too. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, the South Carolina Ports Authority, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.